Okay, so we were just doing a code walkthrough, and JB had noticed a particular change that he wanted to make, and he went
Yeah.
ahead and refactored the code a little bit. And now we tried an experiment. So go ahead and explain what you want to do, JB, and what happened.
Yeah. So obviously, I know how to refactor code, and yes, it was nice, I guess, maybe for people to watch me refactor some TypeScript for the first time. But I'm kind of curious uh, what Bolt would do. So let's try it. So what I would suggest then is, I guess, let's undo our changes by hand.
Right. So you're undoing the refactoring that you just did.
Yeah. So this would be stats.accuracy equals. Okay.
Okay.
And okay, let's just very quickly to see this is why we unit test, folks, because then we
Yep.
wouldn't
So
need
you
to
don't have
go
to
and
do this
check
over
this
and
all
over.
by hand. All right. I don't have to tell people to eat their vegetables if I can just remind them what motivates them. I can wait until all this manual poking around annoys them too much, then they'll choose to write tests or not. And it should be their decision. Why should it be mine? Okay, so we're back where we were. Let's ask Bolt to do what we did. Um, yep, okay. Let's see. So now I'm not going to even give it any context. I'm just going to ask it to do things. So this is perhaps not something that a non-programmer would feel comfortable doing.
Right.
Let's see. Please extract lines 22 to 24 of the file utilstats.ts to a function named calculate accuracy and make it return its output rather than writing that directly into a property of the stats object. So I don't know how precise I need to be here, but let's just try that and see what we get.
Yeah.
Oh, that's very interesting. Look at what it did.
Huh.
It's passing in the stats.
Interesting.
It's destructuring effectively the parts that it needs from stats.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how I feel about that. On the one hand, that's not what I expected it to do. On the other
Right.
hand, it's not awful. I think it's maybe unnecessary. I'm thinking about, if, as an object-oriented programmer, I would have a tendency to think of this as eventually a method on the SessionStats class. Um, and so it would be natural to just take the session stats as a single argument. But like as far as removing the context, isolating code from its context, this actually does that better. And it does make the algorithm stand out more.
It
Hmm.
also protects session stats from being mutated. So,
Yes, I suppose that's true. I keep forgetting that we're working in a language where all bets are off. So um,
well, so
that's
you
that's
if you
interesting.
passed in session stats, into that function,
Right.
there might be some programmer somewhere who decides I'm going to just update session stats in here
Exactly.
and mess around with it.
So it's a little strange because like in a language I could guarantee that session stats were read only. That would be I wouldn't worry
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah.
Um, so that's interesting. That's not what I would expect it to do. This, however, is the thing that I don't think makes a lot of sense.
Right.
Um, and so let's see. What does it think it did? Single responsibility, sure. Reusability, sure. Testability, sure. Readability. I don't like the term readable, but I think uh, the accuracy calculation is more explicit. I really do agree with that. It certainly is more explicit. The reason I wanted to make the change originally was to avoid, the possibility of as the function grows, of us having to tiptoe around local variables, but
Right.
certainly this makes the calculation stand out about as well as it possibly can.
Yeah, and it makes
I,
it clear that it only relies on those three numbers, right? That's also
yeah. And what's kind of interesting about that is, or at least when that happens, so either maybe we choose to do this, or in this case, an LLM chooses to do it for us. It makes me wonder whether those three values together have some meaning in the domain on their own, separate from the rest of the session stats.
hmm
And I honestly don't know. Um, I think it feels like the relationship between them is incidental just based on the fact that there's like what's implicit in there is identifying which outcomes are classified as misses, right? If you think about sort of why would this be miss left and miss right? Well, it's because those are the only kinds of misses.
Yeah,
The From a domain modeling point of view, or however you want to think of it from like an abstract conceptual point of view, this represents the collection of misses, and this is the total throws. So I don't know. That kind of makes me now want to pass the entire session stats uh, object in here and to let it seems to me that choosing which kinds of throw outcomes are misses is a decision
Mhm.
that calculate accuracy should make.
Yeah, it could be. Yeah,
And just by passing those arguments separately, it's like this function is subtly making that choice.
right.
So, okay. Um, Please change calculate accuracy
Actually, would
to
you mind asking it why it passed in those three numbers
okay.
instead of passing in the entire?
All right. Let's see. Why did you pass? So I've switched over to discussion mode just in case people didn't
Right.
notice that. Why did you pass individual values into calculate accuracy instead, rather than passing the entire session stats object as an argument? It's odd to me because it's not going to tell me why it did it. It's just the question is perhaps better understood as how could you possibly rationalize this strange choice? Because of course it's going to rationalize after the fact.
So it's
Um, Reduced coupling. I disagree with that. I'll come back to that in a moment.
okay.
Clarity and explicitness. Absolutely, I agree. It is definitely explicit and clear. Um, I also understand that it is in principle more reusable because it makes fewer assumptions about where the count of the misses comes from.
Right.
However, I genuinely think that this is more tightly coupled, not more loosely coupled. And it's tightly
Hmm.
coupled because calculate accuracy has the knowledge of how to turn misses and throws into a ratio. However, this line of code now, every every line of code is now responsible for figuring out how to distinguish the misses from the hits.
Yeah.
And I can imagine now that that logic is going to be duplicated in every client of this function. Today, that doesn't really matter because there's only one. But if somebody else wants to store the stats slightly differently,
hmm
then, or if somebody else wants to track hits and misses, now maybe they don't care about tracking miss left separate from miss right. Maybe there's new kinds of misses. Maybe there's the difference between missing left but keeping the ball on the pin deck and missing left but throwing the ball in the gutter. Like there's the fact that there are exactly two ways to miss is an
Yeah.
accident of the current situation. And that makes me believe that this is not it's structurally decoupled, but it's logically coupled.
Hmm.
And so I mean, we're now very much in the angels dancing on the head of a pin
Yes.
territory with respect to this actual problem. But the larger problem, like there's a difference between structural coupling and logical or conceptual coupling. And it's very easy for programmers who are trying to refactor very diligently to miss that difference. That's when people like uh, they extract duplication that's a coincidence instead of duplication that actually has meaning. This is sort of the opposite side of that. This is decoupling that is structurally decoupled, but now the conceptual coupling is increased. And so I don't buy that this is better, but I have to say I'm struggling a little bit to justify my intuition. But it seems to me I just don't like it and I'm driving, so I'm going to tell it to change. So
Okay.
um, please change calculate accuracy to accept a session stats as the argument instead of the individual values that it currently accepts. All right. Let's just see if it does that accurately.
Yeah.
And this is a nice, you know what? I didn't expect it to do that, and I actually like that. I didn't expect it to explicitly destructure stats and then just use these simpler names.
Yeah,
In
that's
an earlier iteration of this, it did stats dot stats dot stats dot everywhere.
right.
Um, I think I prefer this.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. And so that can be, I know that we've been approaching this more from the point of view of imagine a non-technical user is building an app, but now also thinking about sort of the transition away from that towards a programmer maintaining code and wanting the LLM not to change too much of it,
Yeah.
and therefore like giving it more surgical, precise, iterative tasks to do. Um, on the one hand, so it can be annoying for the LLM to do more than you asked it to do, but sometimes it's nice to be surprised by the way it chose to do things. And this is an instance where I wouldn't have done this because my native language is effectively Java. So I would have like you can't even do this in Java, so you wouldn't even think to do it in Java.
Yeah.
Um, so it would be very natural to just do stats dot stats dot stats dot and be done with it. But I also have worked a bit in PureScript and JavaScript where we can do this kind of destructuring, and I really quite like it, which now tells me when I'm writing code on my own to think more about doing it this way. Unpack the values I need and then use them as single values. That looks nicer.
And
Yeah.
that's kind of telling me that actually um things like Bolt, LLMs might actually help people who are trying to learn languages, that this
Oh,
is
absolutely.
very, I mean, if you trust that the LLM is going to actually give you some not necessarily best practices, but good practices as opposed to like really horrible things to do, like this is seems like a really good way of doing it. So
Yeah, it reminds me. So previously what I've recommended to programmers is to use a site like Code Wars or Exorcism um, to work on some little exercises, not necessarily because doing the exercises was important, but because like Code Wars, for example, you can go look at other people's solutions. And
yes.
so if I don't know Python, I can go look at 100 different Python solutions to the same problem. And I now have 30 interesting questions to ask, or at least 30 potentially interesting questions to ask. I can go read some stuff. I can ask some experienced Python programmers. I can just be exposed to stuff. This seems like it's doing exactly the same thing. The difference is instead of reading 100 different ways to solve this problem with TypeScript, the LLM is going to pick one at random and show it to me, and I get to decide if I like it or not. So it sort of helps a little bit avoid the overwhelm of trying to look through 100 different or
Look through
30
a
different or
hundred.
even 20
Yeah,
different examples. And when I don't even know what looks good and what isn't, now I
right.
can sort of do that one thing at a time, and the LLM will just throw something at me that it cribbed from someone's code base as like a plausible choice, and I can
Yeah.
decide whether I like it or not. Which
And in real time, you can just ask it. You can even ask it, like, why did you
right.
do, or why is this
Yes. And
wrong? Why is it right?
yeah, exactly. I think asking it to rationalize or explain is kind of helpful for,
Yeah.
again, another way of allowing us to learn languages or platforms or frameworks in a way that is more compatible with how most people's brains work. Reading a book from end to end is not always going to be as helpful for those nitty-gritty details as show me an example in context, show me an example in context, show me an example in context. So
Yeah.
um, I could imagine that in transitioning away from build me an app to help me maintain the app, that's one of the benefits that I would get from this is um, accumulating little examples of how to do things, how to do them better, how to do them worse, um, incrementally at a pace that I can handle, as opposed to reading JavaScript, the good parts, or some other kind of book like that, where I'm just flooded with a bunch of information that I can't handle right now.
Yeah, that makes sense. So then do you have any changes you want to make with respect to this calculate accuracy actually being an exported function?
Yeah, see, I don't like the fact that this is export, so I would just
Yeah.
remove that. And I
Yeah.
get that I get that it could be useful later, but then when I do want to use it, I can just put export back. I mean, that's again, this
Yeah.
is one of those things where I'm very accustomed to instead of trying to design code for the future, make it easy to change when I actually want to do that thing in the future.
Right. So that's all part of evolutionary design, right?
Yes, exactly. That, uh, making this an exported function or exporting this function is a tiny risk. There's no need for it yet. It's very easy to add export later. Whoops. It's very easy to add export later when I want to. Some people will use that as a reason to err on the side of just do it now anyway. And
Yeah.
some people will use that from an evolutionary design standpoint. It works better, generally speaking, when we let code be more restrictive and then make it more visible only as we need it. And as long as we know how to do that by just adding the export function or whatever, a keyboard or whatever it is in your language, then at the moment when I actually want to use this from another place, I'll feel no resistance to just adding that export keyword and making it available. If at that point I feel, stressed for another reason, then that is the trigger to have that design decision made at that point.
Okay.
But I would prefer to keep things less visible now because they'll cause fewer problems.
Okay. So another question I have is,
Yeah.
I think we both kind of were like, well, it's starting to feel maybe a little cumbersome to have this code, to make changes to the code without having unit tests, right?
Yes.
I was wondering if you want to, in our next session, maybe have Bolt add unit tests or
We can
try
certainly
to.
try that. And this is, the app is at a stage where it's still so small that they wouldn't even necessarily need to be unit tests. Like adding any kind of tests at this point could be helpful, whether they were end-to-end tests or under the skin of the UI tests or micro tests. I'm not sure yet. There's so little domain behavior in here that micro tests is probably jumping the gun a bit.
Hmm.
Um, but it might be interesting to ask it to write tests and see what it does. And in
Yeah.
particular, I don't know how to do under the skin testing in React Native. Um, and usually, when you try to write tests under the skin, that's an opportunity to sort of find all the places where the application logic and the UI are unnecessarily coupled to each other and try to tease that apart. It's a
Yeah.
good opportunity to challenge some of the design decisions.
Okay.
And it could also be a good place for me to understand a little bit sort of how that stuff fits together in React. So also from the point of view of a programmer not familiar with the platform, it could help
Yes.
me understand either why React thinks that's a bad idea, or if Bolt just did a questionable job of, if it tangled a bunch of stuff together that it didn't need to. We won't know until we try.
Okay. I also know that there are a couple of features that you'd like to add and a couple of defects that you'd like to fix. So it could be that we could do those, or one of those at least, in conjunction with the unit testing or some kind of testing
Yeah,
next time.
it would be like that would be a good motivation for trying the under the skin testing is to then say, because I have a test in mind for a new feature, and maybe we could even try seeing if Bolt will do some test first programming.
Okay. All right. Let's do that next time.
All right, sounds good.
Okay.